numbers, our 2016 edition that was just released not too long ago. My name is Jinny Jeong, and I am part of the Data Insights team here at CECP. I am joined by my colleague, André Solórzano, who serves not only as the lead author of the report, but also works very closely with me as my colleague. And with that, André.
Hi, Jinny. How are you? I'm really pleased to be here with you and all the public.
Great. And I know that I've got a couple of questions for you, and we've got tons of attendees here who are still joining. So, yeah, that's great. We've got folks who are still signing in, and we're really excited to hear about this report that you've produced. We know that it's a really important one. And for those who are joining and do have questions, please feel free to enter them throughout our short webinar. It's really only for 45 minutes, and I hope to get through everyone's questions and comments. So on your right-hand side, in the window pane, you'll see a section for questions or chat. So feel free to send that in, and we'll try to get them answered as we go along the webinar. And if not, we'll be sure to follow up with you separately. And so with that, André, I know that one interesting teaser you had and a fun fact about this year's Giving in Numbers report was that there was some sort of correlation between Germany and Japan, with the CSP data set. Is that right?
That is correct, Jinny. Actually, we had a record number of participants this year. We had 272 multi-billion-dollar companies participating in Giving in Numbers, and when we added up the total revenues in a year for all these companies, they added up to $7.5 trillion.
So that's trillion with a T.
With a T. That's a lot of zeros, Jinny. I actually lost count of how many zeros, but those $7.5 trillion added up to actually the GDP of two of the greatest economies in the world, Germany and Japan.
All right, and I know that you'll tell us a little bit more about it. And for those who are still joining and signing in, please feel free to download the report so you can go along. I know that André has prepared some data slides, and we'll be going along the report with page numbers with it. Now, for those who may not be familiar with CCP, we are so excited that you're joining us. A little background about us is that we are a nonprofit coalition that started about 17 years ago by the gentleman that you see on the screen, Paul Newman. And he started with this one quote that really serves as a backbone of the work that we do. And he said, "I helped to start CCP with the belief that corporations can be a force for good in society." So that is done through a variety of not only events, but some of the research, one of which you'll be hearing about today. And if you look at the coalition in terms of visuals and logos, we've got the screen here. Today, we do have over 200 companies in the CCP network and coalition, and this only represents a portion of it.
And actually, we want to also thank three of these companies who were our sponsors for this year's Giving Numbers 2016 edition: Newman's Own Foundation, PwC, and Travelers.
That's great, André. And now we know that you've got a couple of fun and fast facts about Giving in Numbers report, some of which, again, you've already told us about Germany and Japan, but do you mind telling us a little bit more?
That is correct. I'm really delighted to mention that we're celebrating the 15th year of surveying, of collecting data on corporate societal engagement trends. Also, as you may know, Giving Numbers is the industry-leading report on corporate societal investment, and we've been collecting data since 2001 with companies' total given information. And I'm also really happy to mention that since 2012, we joined forces with our friends at the Conference Board. And this year, we also had a record number of participants with 272 multi-billion-dollar companies. And when we added up the total number of employees from all these companies, they added up to 7.3 million global employees, which represents, as a coincidence, the total population of a state like New York. And also, as we mentioned, the aggregated revenues in 2015 for all these participant companies added up to $7.5 trillion in aggregated revenues. And we were also delighted to mention that 62 out of the 272 participants were part of the top 100 in the Fortune 500 ranking. And total given from all participants added up to almost $25 billion in 2015, which also, another interesting fact, it represents the total GDP, annual GDP of a middle-income country like El Salvador. So the total contributions of all these participants actually represent all the annual GDP of an entire economy.
So Andre, those are a lot of big numbers that you've just shared with us. We heard some millions, billions, we heard trillions with the T. We know that this is a really important year with the 15th year of reporting and the research, and of course 5 years working with our friends over at the conference board. So with that, we'd love to turn to the audience that is joining us today and take a quick poll with us. We'd love to hear a little bit more about how you might have used our research in the past 6 months. And so with that, we'd like to know, have you used the Giving in Numbers research? Is it A, 5 or more times in the past 6 months? Is it B, 2 to 4 times? Is it C, maybe just once? And D, maybe it's been more than 6 months you've used it. So let's spend a couple more seconds in keeping the poll open. I see the responses coming in. Andre, without peeking, can you make any predictions for what you think might be the most commonly selected option here?
I would love to hear that it's actually option A, but my guess would be probably option B. We'll see.
Okay, so let's go ahead and close the poll. Oh, and I apologize. And it looks like the poll is closed, and yeah, we had 43%, so it's the largest group of folks joining us today saying that they've used it only once. And it looks like the second most, so about a third of those joining us have used it 2 to 4 times in the past 6 months. So that's about once every other month. And we've got 21% saying that it's been more than 6 months since using it. I suspect there may be some folks who might have not had a chance to leverage the resources. And then we've got a gold star 7% who've used it 5 or more times. So thank you for that.
This is an interesting finding.
Well, that's great. Now let's jump into Giving in Numbers trend that the research has been surveying and researching and reporting about for the past 15 years, and that's about total giving. So in the context of this year's research, can you tell us what's happened with total giving?
So also we wanted to explore different options and different trends in corporate societal engagement. And as you can also see from the report on page 7, for the first time we took a closer look to environmental, social, and governance metrics. So we wanted to see and assess companies who had a strong sense of purpose, meaning companies affiliated with CCP, versus other companies in the Fortune 500 ranking. So we not only took a closer look in terms of the financial performance, which is what you can see from the first 2 groups of bars, but also in terms of ESG metrics. And we see that companies affiliated with CCP outperformed all other companies in different metrics, such as water use, total giving, and percentage of women on boards as part of the ESG metrics. And we also have other 2 financial metrics we also compared.
That's great, Andre. So yeah, I realized that before we can talk about total giving, we really have to understand and take a couple steps back to understand what is new for this year's report. And so is it right to say that really this is the first time in which any industry-leading research has been able to tie some financial data along with some of the new and emerging fields of ESG?
That is correct. This is an emerging and really growing field in the corporate societal engagement field. Environmental, social, and governance metrics are being developed, but we wanted to take a stand and be innovative and pioneers in terms of analyzing not only our data in terms of the social component of the ESG, but also in terms of financial metrics and environmental and governance.
And that's great. And so just to restate that, the light green bar represents the companies affiliated with CCP, and the darker green represents companies in the Fortune 500, but really the takeaway here is that we're seeing all of the positive benefits and some of the great work that affiliated companies are leading with. And I know that you also mentioned that there are a couple of additional new features in this year's report. So about this ESG, that was on page 7 of the report for those who are able to follow along. And then we've got another topic on impact investing.
That is correct. And we follow the Global Impact Investing Network's definition of impact investing. For those who are not familiar, that's another topic we also wanted to take a closer look to. And for the first time, we analyzed companies engaged in some type of impact investing activity. And as impact investing, we mean investments made into companies, organizations, and funds with the intention to generate social and environmental impact alongside a financial return. So what we're about to see, and you can take a closer look at this on page 8 of our report, is a comparison between those companies engaged in some type of impact investing, which is what you can see on the right-hand side of the slide, and all the rest of other companies who are not following any type of impact investing initiative. And we see that impact investing doesn't happen in detriment of social engagement or social investment. And on the left-hand side of the slide, we see the performance in terms of median total giving as a percentage of revenues, median total giving in millions of dollars, and also median total giving as a percentage of pre-tax profits. And we see that on the right-hand side of the slide, those companies engaged in some type of impact investing outperformed all other companies in terms of these 3 metrics. For example, the median total giving of companies engaged in some type of impact investing initiatives had a median of total giving of $25.7 million in 2015 compared to $15 million for all other companies.
So what we're seeing is really interesting data because we see 2 sets of data sets, like you mentioned. On the left-hand side is a group of 146 companies who actually reported, no, they are not active with impact investing. And then comparing that with some of the metrics of another group of companies who said, yes, we are at least, at a minimum, somewhat active with impact investing, using the description that you had just given of the definition of impact investing, and that was comparing against 71 companies. So it's really great to see that there are some clear differentiators between these 2 types of companies. I know that you've got more information on page 8 of the report, and that this is an area where we know the corporate sector is starting to pay attention to, and that we expect to see additional research coming in the following year.
Regarding investing with purpose, we are going to release a publication related to this.
Okay, that's great. And I know that there was a 3rd key highlight that you wanted to share with everyone that you might have even mentioned was one of your favorite data insights of this year.
That is correct, Jinny. Actually, this is personally my favorite finding from this year's report, because we were curious as to what can drive an increase in the average volunteer participation rate. By volunteer participation rate, we mean the percentage of employees who have participated in some type of volunteer program in at least 1 hour of their time. So we wanted to see, is there such thing as a sweet spot in terms of the number of types of domestic volunteer programs offered by companies?
And then, Andre, when you say domestic, you're talking about volunteer programs that are being offered to employees within the domestic country in which the company operates. Is that right?
Where it's headquartered, exactly.
Okay.
So what we see here on the y-axis, on the vertical axis, is the average volunteer participation rate. And on the x-axis, which is the horizontal axis, we have the number of types of domestic volunteer programs offered by companies.
So we're talking about the numbers from the left to the right, 1 through all the way to the 9.
Exactly.
Representing the number of programs being offered.
Exactly. For instance, if a company just offered board leadership, that would fall under the first bar on the one that says 1, with a sample size of 7 companies. But if a company offered 2 types of domestic volunteer programs, that company would fall under the second bar, the one that says 2, with a sample size of 10. And as we move from left to right, we see that the average volunteer participation rate of employees starts increasing, especially when companies achieve a number of 6 types of domestic volunteer programs. On the bar that says 6 with a sample size of 21, we saw that, interestingly, that was the number of types of volunteer programs that achieved the highest volunteer participation rate. So in other words, when companies offer 6 types of volunteer programs, domestically speaking, that's when companies achieved a higher volunteer participation rate from their employees. What this also tells us is that probably employees could get or feel more engaged in terms of volunteering when they are offered more options that can be more relatable to their personal interest or sense of purpose.
So that's great to hear. That's really interesting, and I know that you do talk about it in the report. I see that here, page 18 of the latest Giving in Numbers report. So the 38% with the green arrow growing up really represents, again, 6 volunteer programs that were being offered. There were 21 companies within this group, and on average, these 21 companies had reported a 38% of their employees who had volunteered.
That is correct. And in total, we assess a total number of 12 volunteer programs. Examples of this include flexible scheduling, company-wide day of service, board leadership, pro bono services, volunteer sabbatical, incentive bonus, team grants, etc., etc.
Yeah, so I think it is also important to clarify for those who are joining that when you talk about the type of volunteer programs, you're talking about the different categories or the different distinct volunteer programs that are being offered. And you did say that there were 12 that CCP does identify. The chart on the screen only shows up to 9 because that was really where the bulk of the data point was gathered. And that, let's say, for example, if someone is offering 4 different types of pro bono service, that really only counts as one type because it all does fall under the category of pro bono service.
That is absolutely correct, and that's an important distinction to make.
Okay, and I know that there were also some interesting data about skills-based volunteerism.
And going back into that number of 6.5 or 6, interestingly, we took a closer look to companies that, regardless of any other domestic volunteer programs offered, we took a closer look to those companies who offer skills-based volunteer programs. And those companies who offer what we define as skills-based volunteer programs, meaning pro bono service or board leadership, which are programs that tie employees' personal interest and also their personal skills into engagement, those companies attained a higher volunteer participation rate. And when we checked what was the average number of domestic volunteer programs that they offered, guess what? The number of volunteer programs, domestically speaking, that these companies offered was 6.5. So there's something about that number, a magical number between 6 and 7 that attains a higher volunteer participation rate.
Yeah, and I know that in the report you talk about not only what type of volunteer programs are the most commonly offered, but also what companies consider to be the most successful. And then you also talk about which programs were the fastest growing.
Yes.
And speaking of skills-based volunteerism, you talked a lot about pro bono service, and for those joining on the call, CCP did create a valuation guidance along with the friends from the Taproot Foundation on identifying how companies can use an easy-to-access resource. It's really a grid and a chart where you can identify your employee by his or her seniority. So she may be an entry-level employee, mid-level, or perhaps at a senior level. And then we break it down by the type of service that was being offered, whether it's advertising and or marketing skills, which will have a different hourly value than perhaps a skill that is that might fall under legal aid or legal counsel. So certainly do look on CCP's website. We do have it available as a handout on your right-hand webinar pane so that you can take a look, download it. It's a really easy way to not only value employee volunteerism, but also you can actually count that as non-cash giving with CECP's total giving metrics.
That is
right?
correct.
And actually, this is a perfect segue to talk about total giving and maybe some of the trends that we've been seeing for this past and most recent data set.
Exactly. We wouldn't feel comfortable if we hadn't described what's been the latest trend in terms of total giving. Has it increased, or has it decreased, or has it remained stable? So what we have here is a comparison of a 3-year match set. And by 3-year match set, we refer to companies who provided total giving information in each of the last 3 years. What this helps us with is to compare apples with apples. We're comparing the same set of companies along those last 3 years. What we have also here is each line represents the median of total giving across all the different industries. For example, the gray line describes the median of total giving in 2013. The yellow line describes the median of total giving in 2014, and the orange line describes the median of total giving for 2015. And we have this trends for each of the 10 sectors that we consider that follow the Bloomberg Industry Classification Standard. We have a total of 10 sectors that go from communications and so forth and so on. And in the right-hand side of the chart, we have the trend across the board, across all companies. And from here, we see that total giving, the median of total giving, has remained stable, and actually it's slightly increased from 2013. It went from $21 million in 2013 to $21.1 million in 2015, which represents an increase of 1%.
And this is great because, just to reiterate, that this is a 3-year match set, meaning that we're looking at the same group of 211 companies, and we're following their data over a 3-year time period. So this is truly an apples-to-apples benchmarking. And as you mentioned, there were 10 industries, and I see from the left to right, communications, going all the way to the right, utilities, and you've kindly represented this data that you just cited with all companies with the 4 stars.
4 gold stars. So we had a total number of 4 sectors, 4 industries that increased their median of total giving: consumer staples, financials, technology, and utilities.
And for those who are curious as to which companies might be represented under which sector or industry, you can go to the back of our report and take a look. We do have them alphabetized under each industry. So, and you did mention, Andre, that we use the Bloomberg Industry Classification System or standard, right? And that is actually a well-regarded external and objective benchmarking of industry and classifications that the financial sector and really the investing field uses.
That is perfectly correct. For instance, the consumer staples includes consumer products, retail products that basically, the way that I would define it is that people can ingest them, such as beverages, packaged food, manufacturing, tobacco, product wholesalers, food products, and so forth and so on.
And what about consumer discretionary, which is actually a pretty large group with 24 companies falling under it?
And it actually has a large industry subgroup. This includes companies that produce products such as apparel and textile, automobiles, home and office products, leisure products, manufacturing, commercial services, consumer services, and so forth and so on.
And so now we're talking, at a high level, the giving that really varies by industry, because we see that the giving has increased over the 3-year time period with the same group of companies, but there are some differences by industry. Now, can you explain to us the different components of what is considered total giving?
Absolutely. Total giving includes 3 main categories: direct cash, which refers to cash given from corporate headquarters or regional offices; foundation cash, which corresponds to cash contributions from the corporate foundation; and non-cash, which refers to the rest, which includes product donations, pro bono services, and other non-cash contributions such as computers, for example, office supplies,
Okay.
assessed at a fair market value.
And I know that our valuation guidance will provide some details on that. So total giving is, you said, direct cash, foundation cash, and non-cash.
Absolutely.
Now, what about some of the giving that isn't necessarily falling under one of those three categories?
Absolutely. That is an important component, and given the feedback we have received from our companies, that is a very important metric that companies would love to follow. And we know for sure that total giving doesn't only limit to just the total contributions provided by companies. There are many other aspects that companies would like to know about in terms of trends. That includes aspects like, what is the value from volunteer hours from employees? What is the philanthropic leverage? And by philanthropic leverage, we mean all the dollar contributions from employees, suppliers, and vendors.
So basically anyone but the company themselves.
Exactly. Or aspects like the management and program costs. Sometimes we get comments from companies saying, why don't we include this in total giving? So following this, in this regard, CECP is developing a pilot study that assesses and defines what is all this good beyond giving, all the contributions that are not included in what we typically measure as total giving.
So I see that the orange here in the diagram, that's total giving. Again, the three different components of total giving. The teal color with the volunteer hours, the philanthropic leverage. CCP is currently and has been collecting that information. It's just now counted in total giving. And then the outer circular section with the blue is where you're saying that we're seeing some increased interest by companies in measuring that.
And even other aspects as socially driven product development, socially driven business decisions, or even internships with a social mission. How to assess, how to measure all these aspects. But just one of these aspects of good beyond giving, one of these categories of good beyond giving is what we call philanthropic leverage, which refers to the total dollar amount given by employees and non-employees, such as customers. For instance, if you're a retailer and you have a campaign where customers can donate for a given cause, that would fall under this category. Or if vendors or suppliers also provide a dollar amount towards a specific cause, that would also fall under the category of philanthropic leverage. What we also have on the right-hand side of the slide is the average philanthropic leverage evolution over the course of the last 3 years, also from a matched set of companies that provided information about philanthropic leverage for each of the last 3 years. And we see that the median of the average of philanthropic leverage has increased from $9.4 million to $10.1.
So the takeaway being that total giving has really expanded, and a lot of the research that the Giving in Numbers report has been reporting out on for the past 15 years is driven by those who are participating, who are absorbing the information, and it's really good to see that there's an expanded desire to look at how this area of giving has increased, and really interesting statistic here with how companies are leveraging some of their stakeholders, whether it's internal with employees or external with their vendors and customers.
Exactly, and more information about philanthropic leverage can be found on page 23 of Giving in Numbers.
Page 23, great. Now, we've been talking about giving. Let's move on to core philanthropic and corporate societal engagement activities. Tell me about matching gifts, which we know is very important as well, as another form of employee engagement.
Yes, matching gifts can be a really important way in which companies can help employees to engage in contributing to their personal causes or causes that they feel more related to. So matches actually represented 12% of total cash given from companies. This is a trend that has remained pretty much stable in the course of the last years. And what we see from this bar chart is that basically 9 out of 10 companies offers any type of matching gift program in 2015. And we have also the offering of the other types of matching gift programs, such as year-round policy, which refers to a campaign that happens happens year round, all year long, and the workplace giving campaign typically deducted from payroll of employees, typically happens in the form of United Way. That was offered by a little bit more than half of companies, and so forth and so on.
So, Andre, I see that this again represents, the first bar represents the matching gifts data across all different types of matching gift programs, and then CCP has identified the 4 that you've just explained with the year-round policy going all the way to disaster relief. Now, I see that there are 22% of companies who are reporting that they offer a different type of matching gift program under the category of other. Can you just give an example of 1 or 2?
Absolutely. That sounds really, as the category itself may sound, and if we are explicit, it's all other categories that do not fall under the first 4 categories, but that includes aspects like matching gift programs dedicated or specialized in a specific cause like education, or for instance, when a matching gift program is offered only to board leaders.
Okay, so yeah, that would explain it. And I know that for across the entire globe, there is a movement of Giving Tuesday. So that's actually hashtag and spelled out Giving Tuesday, happening on Tuesday, November 29th, where it's a great way to engage employees and to engage stakeholders that are involved with your company. So for those who are involved or would like to learn more, certainly go on Twitter or Facebook and look up the hashtag, and there will be a lot of activity with that. Now, Andre, we've been talking a lot about giving. Let's talk about volunteerism and what volunteer programs, data, and insights that you're able to share with us today.
Yes, we were curious as to which domestic volunteer programs have increased the most over the course of the last 3 years. What we have here is the percentage of companies offering each of these domestic volunteer programs. Again, we have a 3-year match set of companies that provided information of their offerings of volunteer programs in the course of each of the last 3 years. So interestingly, we found that 2 programs were the ones who increased the most in terms of the offering from companies. For instance, on the second group of bars where it says pro bono service, we see that that was the domestic volunteer program that increased the most, that grew at a fastest pace in terms of the offering. In 2013, it was offered by 43% of companies, but in 2015, it was offered by 54% of companies. That's an increase of 10 percentage points, which is what we have in the lower part of the bars.
So we're looking at the green numbers, the green text and the little arrow facing up.
Exactly. And then this is followed by board leadership, which increased 8 percentage points from 2013. So interestingly, we see that the 2 fastest growing domestic volunteer programs were skills-based volunteer programs.
And and this is pretty remarkable because, like you said, this is a match set. So we're looking at 145 companies back in 2013, and maybe only 43% are offering pro bono service. But you look forward 2 years ahead, and it's now 54%. So companies are actually seeing the value and saying that yes, let's do engage and let's do invest in certain types of programs
in ways that can be even more relatable to employees, in which they can apply their personal set of skills to a particular cause.
Well, and now, how are companies actually measuring some of these programs? Because we know that there is quite a bit of resources needed and that employees are loving it, but then we also know that there is so much work that needs to be done. How are companies able to identify, yes, we are succeeding and we are engaging employees?
Absolutely. Companies also are concerned in terms of measuring the business value of their volunteer programs. And from this, we know that some companies perform employee engagement surveys.
That's great. So can you give an example of how companies might be doing that?
Yes, and before that also I want to mention that you can find in giving numbers that 1 out of 4 companies measure the business value of their employee engagement programs, that is a number that tells us that there is still room for increase in terms of measuring the business value of employee engagement. So in other words, 25% of companies measure the business value of their volunteer programs. And examples of this include employee engagement surveys that compares and try to correlate the job satisfaction among employees and their volunteer satisfaction. Other examples include providing rates or scores from employees in terms of their perception of that employee engagement program. Also, their companies create surveys to compare the employee engagement of companies and how this affects the well-being of employees, how that affects also the retention of those employees, how employee engagement affects or correlates to promotion of employees, or even the building of their leadership skills.
And that's great. So it seems like really understanding the satisfaction and the retention and the happiness level and engagement level is perhaps through a survey, but it sounds like most likely that they would have to leverage the function of the HR team to ensure that this is being well distributed.
Exactly.
Now, talking about measurement, I know that you had some interesting data regarding measurement and evaluation across grantees and grant portfolios.
Yes, and I know this is an important aspect for our companies. We wanted to see in 2015 what was the percentage of companies who were measuring the societal outcomes and or impacts of their programs. And we see from the left-hand side of the slide on the gray circle that basically 80% of companies measure the societal outcomes and or impacts of their social programs. But also we wanted to see what kind of measurement they were performing. So in the right-hand side of the slide, in the colored pie chart, we saw that companies are not precisely measuring in a higher percentage the impact or outcomes of their social programs on all their grants. As we can see from the purple section of the pie chart on the right, 37% of companies who are measuring their societal outcomes did so on just their flagship programs, on just their strategic programs. So they are being more strategic in terms of what they measure, given the limitations in terms of resources, time, and efforts they can apply in terms of measuring. We can also see from the yellow portion of the pie chart on the right that 18% of companies measure the societal outcomes and or impacts on all their grants, but that's not the majority. The majority is 37% on strategic programs.
That's interesting because we know that although the strategic program has the largest number of companies who are focusing their measurement on there, it's interesting to see that 18% are evaluating and measuring throughout and across their entire portfolio. Another 18%, that orange slice of the pie, is only measuring grants of a certain monetary threshold. So, maybe grants over 5,000 or 10,000, 1 million, whatever it might be. And I know that you've also talked about some trends in that more companies are becoming more strategic, and that this yellow slice of the pie has actually gotten smaller, which is actually a positive sign because it shows that companies are thinking and being a bit more intentional.
Absolutely. The public can also find more information about this on page 27 of our report. That's where you will be able to see in a 3-year method what's been the evolution of the measurement on all grants. And we can see from the research that that has actually gone down in the course of the last 3 years.
And I know that we would love to stay on with this topic as long as we can, but I know that you've got one more interesting slide for us to share with us today, and that's about some of the FTEs and employee size.
Yes, this is another one of my favorite findings from this year's survey. We see that what we have here on the left-hand side of the slide is the evolution of the aggregated number of employees from 2011 to 2015. Typically, we do a 3-year method of companies, but in order to see real trends or evolution in terms of the number of employees and also in terms of the number of giving or contribution staff teams, we took a larger look from 2011 to 15. So on the left-hand side of the slide, we have a comparison of what was the total number, aggregated number of contribution staff team members. And in 2011, that number was 1,500, and it increased by 3 percentage points to 1,550 in 2015. And for the same set of companies, we also saw, interestingly, a decrease, an overall decrease in their in the total employee headcount from 8.31 million to 8.16 million. So that was a decrease of 2%. So in the same companies that had an overall downturn of employee headcount, they actually saw an increase in the contribution staff team members.
So that's interesting. So just to restate, in the orange represents the employee headcount of the total employees in a company. So it's actually gone down, you're saying, here, that -2. But you look at the blue, and these are the folks who are representing employee volunteer programs, the corporate foundations, many of you who are joining the call today, that their role has actually increased.
Exactly. So companies are recognizing the value of contribution staff team members. And on the right-hand side, we see a comparison of the cash giving that each of these contribution staff team members have had to manage over the course of the last 5 years. So the number of overall contribution staff team members has increased, but also has the level of responsibilities they have to deal with. So on the blue line, we have the median of cash given per FTE, full-time equivalent, because we know medians also help get rid of outliers and the effect of outliers in the data, but we also kept in the purple line the average cash given per FTE. And in both situations, we saw an increase in the cash given per FTE.
So this is great. So the headline here being that the giving by companies is actually increasing. And with that, we'd love to just also hear from the audience just one last time in hearing some of the key trends that André has shared with us. And hearing from you, what do you think might be the most relevant for you in the coming weeks or maybe today? So is it the total giving that might be most relevant to you and how it has increased? The fact that there are other ways of giving beyond, the total cash or the 3 primary categories. Is it skills-based volunteerism that André spoke about? Maybe the sweet spot for volunteer programs that you said it was between 6 and 7, or that your role, the giving team members' roles, are actually increasing. So with that, we are going to just give it a couple more seconds. We will close the poll. Let me go ahead and share the polls with you. So it looks like, really interesting, 33% have said the skills-based volunteer programs, and it's a tie with the sweet spot for volunteer programs. So certainly we will keep that in mind.
And interestingly, I would say those two findings are related to each other because, as I mentioned, the skills-based volunteer programs are the ones who also drove more participation rates.
Yeah, absolutely.
And had a sweet spot of 6.5 average number of volunteer programs.
Great. And so with that, we apologize that we didn't have a chance to have a formal Q&A session. We do hope that we were able to answer everyone's questions because we were monitoring as we were going along. As a quick closure, we do have some exciting CCP initiatives coming your way, so please stay tuned. We've got something called the Strategic Investor Initiative, where we are providing a platform for not only CEOs but with the investors in leveraging and enhancing and emphasizing the need for long-termism. So getting rid of that quarterly call and thinking long-term. There's also the Global Exchange, where we're actually creating a formal partnership and collaboration with other CCP-like organizations across the globe, and we're able to share with you their findings, their trends, their cultural nuances. On the right-hand side is that Investing with Purpose that André did mention, and then the Good Beyond Giving pilot. And so with that, just know that we do have some resources available to you, regardless of whether you're affiliated with CCP or not. There's the Giving in Numbers report. It is free. If you would like a print copy, certainly send us an email and we will be happy to mail you one. We've got a complimentary report called Giving Around the Globe. It is included as a handout in your webinar window pane, so please feel free to download it. It focuses on a lot of the topics that you have come to love in our Giving in Numbers. And then finally, for those who are affiliated, please keep us in mind that we can provide you customized data services and benchmarking. And so with that, we thank you for tuning in today. Andre?
Thank you so much, Jinny. It's been delightful to spend time with you and the public.
Great, and we hope that we will see all of you again sometime soon. Thank you for joining. Have a great day.